or good morning, good evening if you're following us from one other side of the planet. Welcome all to this session on transforming the food system. For those of you who joined us this morning in the high-level panel we had at the central stage, we will build on that session now and we will deep dive a little bit more into the content with a wonderful panel that will be introduced to the, later this session. But first let me introduce myself as the opener of this session now. My name is Martin Lok. I'm the Executive Director of the Capitals Coalition. And for those of you who don't know, and it's wonderful that they suddenly everyone starts to clap, by the way. We are a global collaboration redefining value to transform decision making. What we are doing is working with over 400 organizations ranging from business to governments to the financial sector to academics to accountancy to embed the value of nature and people into their decisions. And so you see here in the infinity loop that what we want to do is to create an acceleration by collaboration and by using a joint understanding of what does value really mean for everyone. So the challenge that we see as Capitals Coalition, and I'm quite sure that you all recognize that, is that we are failing to address the global challenges of nature loss, rising social inequality and climate change. And a huge reason for that is that we are not counting for all the valuable things in life, on the planet and all around us. So by embedding these into the decision making, we think we can get on a better path to tackling the global challenges that are on this slide. So we have a strategy for the next 10 years working towards 2030. And what we are mainly doing, and I just want to show this briefly to you, is to change the math, change the conversation, change the rules, and then change the system. So to make that maybe more tangible for you, changing the math is about changing the definition of success. When are we happy with the results that we are creating? Is it just a short-term financial gain that we are looking for, or is there more in life? With changing the conversation, that has all to do with who do we need to have a talk. Any one of you who attended or saw the opening ceremony with Christine Lagarde on the stage, I think got a real good kind of feeling what that is, bringing everyone on the stage. Because suddenly the financial sector is a key actor at an IUCN Congress on conservation, which is new. So that has to do with changing the conversation, is to bring everyone to the table that really needs to be part of the solution. Changing the rules means that at the end we have to make sure that the rules but also the incentives that are embedded in the system are rewarding the social and the planetary outcomes that we all strive for. If that's not the case, we have to change the rules. We all know that is what we need to do, that the majority of subsidies, for example, in agriculture are not yet supporting the right outcomes. And then these three things together will bring us to a systemic change that will lead to achieving the outcomes that we want, that is a nature positive, a climate neutral and an equitable world as soon as possible, but at least by 2030. So a brief history. We started in 2012 as the TEEB for Business Coalition. So what is interesting, it was TEEB, so it was following on the work led by Pavan Sukhdev on the economics for ecosystems and biodiversity, putting a monetization figure to biodiversity, also linked to business. So the question was raised: what can business do with these insights? Then in 2014 we changed the name to the Natural Capital Coalition because we wanted to also acknowledge that we work with other other organizations, not only with business, but with finance, with accountancy, with the others that I mentioned before. And then in 2016, we launched the Natural Capital Protocol, which is a standardized framework for business to understand value. It's 140 pages, 9 steps, looks like a lot. It is a lot, but it's also a very practical tool to start embedding the value of nature into your decision making. And then what happened after that was that WBCSD, who was a key partner of us from the beginning on, created a social and human capital coalition, and they built a likewise social and human capital protocol with the same systematics behind it, but then tapping into also to the other capitals. So starting with nature, but then social and human capital all together. Of course, there's also produced capital. So that's what people know the better. So we brought that together, 4 capitals in the Capitals Coalition in 2020. So why am I informing you about all of these at an agricultural session? Because I think it's interesting to see that the TEEBagri guidelines that we will discuss today was our first product where at a very practical level we brought together these 4 capitals. And so when you're working in agriculture, yes, you can still have a look at the Natural Capital Protocol or the Social and Human Capital Protocol, but you can only also just start with the guidelines because they have all of them together. And the added value there is that we also discuss how they are interrelated. So that is, I think, even better. And then if you're still wondering what are capitals and why are we talking about capitals at a conservation congress, well, it is any resource or asset that stores or provides value to people. And to me, the nice thing about thinking also of biodiversity in terms of capitals is that it kind of puts you on a path to think about how can I invest in it, how can I keep it into a healthy state. Also, if you're not working on conservation every day, but if you're in a bank, that makes more and more sense. And one of the greatest examples, I think, is now the reports published 2 years ago by the Dutch Central Bank and just a couple of days ago by the French Central Bank that did a study on how important is natural capital for the produced capital, for our financial stability. Within France, for example, the incredible amount of that, they say that more than 40% of the financial system in France is depending on natural capital and is at risk if natural capital is at risk. And we all know that natural capital is at risk. So a central bank stating that really is important. And they do that because they link all of the capitals. Natural capital being the stock and the renewable, non-renewable resources. So that's the planet, all living things. Social capital is the networks. So IUCN brought together 4,000 people in one social network, you could say here today, with a joint understanding, like we have, joint understanding that we have to do something about nature loss. Human capital, all the knowledge and skills combined in this room and in companies, in organization. And the produced capital is what usually we know because that's already in annual reports. So 4 capitals all together. And then the question is, why do we need this and what does it add to other approaches like CSR? And I mean, one of the reasons is, and let me go to the next slide on this. What we see when you start to implement a capitals approach and you compare it with a more traditional CSR approach, and CSR is more or less like you're running a company and people from the outside coming in with problems from the outside, they say you have to look to that too. But capitals is really inside, and the first element that we saw is that capitals help businesses to distinguish their impacts and dependencies. So impacts is what they are doing to the planet, dependencies is what they are using from the planet, which is there or not in the quality what they need. And it's this dependency bit that really can bring them into trouble, as the French report that I mentioned shows. Also, capitals help you to start thinking about the value. So when you're talking for 5 minutes, you get thirsty, water becomes more valuable than when you just had a drink. Just an example that having the measure of a bottle of water is half a liter, sometimes that half a liter is more welcome to you than on other times. So that's the difference of measuring and valuing. Valuing really tells you why is it important to you, and the capitals approach help you to better see that. And then the last thing, and that goes back to the 4 capitals too, I think, is that if you're having a capitals approach, you really look at the connections between all the different elements into natural capital or social capital. One of the best examples of that is the SIA system now launched by governments. So it's their standard to, in a standardized way, account for natural capital, and that's a very systematic way that they are doing that. So I skipped this one. Last slide is on the Food Systems Summit, just to make you aware that, of course, there is an important Food Systems Summit in 3 weeks from now, 23rd of September. And there was some preliminary meetings, and the outcomes is, and I think they are really reflecting also what's discussed here, the need to measure what matters and evaluate is really a key element if we want to make progress. That's also clearly now tabled for the Food System Summit. The other thing is that food is a cross-cutting issue. If you talk about food, or if you talk about clothing, or if you talk about transportation, you find those cross-cutting issues. And food probably is one of the most important ones because it's something you need in daily life. So it's also a real good opportunity to have conversations with people around it. The other thing I want to highlight is, yes, there are a lot of methodologies there that can be used that maybe are not yet perfect, maybe are not fully standardized, although we are getting there more and more, but also they are ready for action. And so some of the speakers today will really bring that message and show what they are doing. Without further ado, I want to invite you, Willem Verwerda, to the stage, the CEO of Commonland, one of the most exciting companies that was launched, I think, in the Netherlands. Now, already how long ago? 8 years ago. 2013, probably it was in 2012 when you got the butterfly with your name, when you were leaving. Huh? Was it a frog? I always thought it was a butterfly. There's a frog somewhere out there that's called Willem Verwerda, by the way. But never mind about that. Commonland is a business, and they are their business is to restore ecosystems with a time horizon of 30 years. They use a fabulous model. You will tell us all about this. Please, Willem, come to the floor.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be here. I hope you hear me well. And to be honest, I'm an ecologist, a tropical ecologist. I was directing IUCN Netherlands for more than 12 years. So I've been in the NGO world for many years, headed tropical rainforest funds, and realized that if you look into conservation, you are doing wonderful work, but sometimes you conserve a rainforest here, and around it 500,000 hectares of soybeans are going to be planted, and the rainforest has been removed over there. So when you have been working in that world for quite a while, I was thinking, what we need to do is find a narrative and a language in such a way that people can talk to each other. Financiers, investors, philanthropists, farmers, ecologists and conservationists, local entrepreneurs and local public servants. And that is super difficult, I can assure you. So what I did when I left IUCN Netherlands, I decided to travel all over the world and interview farmers and investors in London, New York and Frankfurt, and farmers in lots of places, like from El Salvador to India, and ask them a question. What is your frustration and what is your dream? And all those farmers said, my frustration is that I cannot hand over my land to the next generation in a better condition. And my dream is that this landscape and this community is revitalized again. Because otherwise we need to move to the city, migrate, immigrants. The investors said, listen, I cannot find pipeline. There is not any investable pipeline that is positive. It's all about a little bit less negative, less fuel, less fossil, less carbon, whatever. So, and my dream is that I can find positive pipeline, regenerative pipeline. It wasn't there. So no investable projects. And by the way, there was another thing for both sectors. They were, by the next generation, we're asking them, Dad, you are ruining my land, the farmers, and Dad, you are investing in the destruction of my future. And so that was more a spiritual component. So bringing that all together, I decided to go from theory of change to a practice of change and set up a framework that could entail this and tested it. And that's what we did. Let me go to the next slide. Oh, sorry. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. So basically, the fact is, if you really look into what an ecosystem is and what is happening, is this is the current business model all over the world, in one sentence. Maximization of return on investment per hectare that is the current business model. That always lead to degradation worldwide. Mangrove clearing, grassland, everywhere it's the same thing. It's destruction. And we are doing this for, of course, centuries. And now it's building up. The ecosystem degradation basically leads to 4 losses. People lose their hope and purpose. People will lose their employment and social security. So they move away, they migrate. Of course, the loss of biodiversity, soil and water, you know it. You can see it everywhere here. But at the end, you have a local loss of economic activities. So you get very large degraded areas. When I spoke to those farmers and those business people and investors, I noticed there were 2 important words: return and risk. We all know them. And I've been an entrepreneur as well before I started to work in the conservation world. And these were the 2 words you always were looking at. For the farmers, for the investor, but also for the conservation community. So I started to use the word return and said, okay, if these are the 4 losses that is always leading to degradation, you need to look into a positive story that is inspiring. You need to return the spirit, return the inspiration. You need to return the social environment, capital, you could say. At that, then you can talk about, let's say, the return of natural capital. And finally, if you do this well, the risk will go down and you can have conversation about sustainable financial investments. So this was the first way of switching the mindset and creating a narrative that from bottom up that people could understand. Not only the jargon we can hear from, in our world, everywhere, but, bottom up approach where people can work with. That was the idea, to create a narrative that people can understand, farmers, ecologists, local entrepreneurs in the field. Oh, next slide. But to do this well, you need to look from a landscape perspective. And that means you need to make that simpler. So when we talk about the landscape, we talk about an area the size of minimum 100,000 hectares. And we look into a division between 3 zones. You need to look in where is the natural zone, where is the place where nature should thrive, protected area management, ecological corridors, etc. Where's the place where people earn their money, quite often in cities and in local infrastructure. And then there is a zone, what I call the combined zone, which is almost absent in the world, but it's starting to grow now. And that's a place where you combine production of biodiversity and food and fibers. So this is the place where, so far, this is the place which is now dominated by monoculture, chemical agriculture. And we need to turn that into biodiversity positive production. Combine 2 things. So with these 3 zones, it was possible to create a narrative for farmers and local entrepreneurs in a landscape to understand what we call a kind of read that landscape, read that ecosystem. And that is super important because most of the people who live in landscapes quite often have no idea where they are and how things are acting. Of course, with the exception of indigenous people. Next slide, I will go fast.
Yes.
Of course, to do this well, we entered in a 5 process element. We needed to look and create landscape partnerships, and we used the Theory U. Maybe you've heard of it. That's a partnership process management tool. We create shared understanding, work in collaborative planning, and finally take action, map the whole thing, and with that landscape partnership, create businesses. And that's what we started to do since 2013. We built a proof of concept. This is the whole framework, and it's published in English, and I've got Spanish copies as well now. And now this framework is accepted by the ecosystem, by the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration as a logical framework to work with. So more than 20 years, 5 process elements, zoning, that will deliver 4 returns. And all those returns, of course, can be looked up. You are associated to this SDGs. So what did we do? We started to work with local teams in Spain, Australia, South Africa, in Zambia and Haiti, and also in the Netherlands. And worked in landscape partnerships to restore our entire landscape, 1 million hectares between Granada and Murcia. And this is now resulting in a local partnership of farmers and local entrepreneurs. Since 2013, we've set up companies, we found investments for companies, and still it's going on. It's a process, so it will not stop. And increasingly you see you can really work with that framework to create that narrative and use that narrative for people to understand what should they do and what shouldn't they do. Same thing in Australia, where we are working in the wheat belt of Australia, and we founded the first listed company in regenerative agriculture in the world, called Wide Open Agriculture. It is listed since 2018, and it has quadrupled in value already. So, and this is a landscape regenerative agriculture company working in the combined zone, while we work with Aboriginal people to restore the natural zone. So what we have experienced basically is that this narrative, this framework is working, and it's a bottom-up framework. But of course, there are other frameworks in the world. And you asked me to say something, and I need to stop, about the differences between the capital approach and the for returns framework approach. So this is very much bottom-up, as I just said. We do it by action, and people understand it. That's the most important thing. And of course, this is very important for top-down and to get the large actors like corporates and so on board. You can see they're almost all aligned. We use some different languages, different narratives, but at the end, it will strengthen each other. And I think that is the most important thing that we need to do here as well. Bottom-up need to come together with top-down, and at the end, make the change in that's very much needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Willem. I think...
And there is a Spanish version ready now as well. Well, I've got a copy.
Spanish, English, and probably
available on the web.
Probably not in Dutch, but
not in Dutch. No.
Okay.
Sorry.
I can live with that. I think it is an excellent example of that. Also goes back to the Food System Summit and the outcome so far, because what they are asking for is we need measurement and we need action. So you have a measurement scheme with the 4 returns framework, which of course is aligned with what we are doing as Capitals Coalition with the TEEBAgriFood guidelines, but you also translate it immediately to action in Murcia, in Australia.
In 10 countries now, and now it's adopted. We work with TNC in India. They want to work with it. CI very much likes it. We are part of the 1,000 Landscapes Initiative, so it is really building up now. Yeah, building a proof of concept, basically.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We go to the next session, and Louise, please. Take one of those.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Louise Amar, working on the TEEBAgri program within the Capitals Coalition, will now take over the role to moderate the session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Martin, and thank you very much, Willem. I found it fascinating, regenerative agriculture, and I personally lived into a farm, and I saw dryland being transformed to oasis space thanks to the regenerative approach as agroforestry. So I think we really are in the same purpose. We all want to nurture back natural, social and human capital more than extract from them. And for that I invite you all to look at one article we wrote about regenerative agriculture that benefit economies, society and nature. But let me introduce you to the TEEBAgriFood, so the Economic of Ecosystem and Biodiversity for Agriculture and Food project. So this is a project that is hosted by UN. Let's see, check. Yeah, by the UN Environmental Programme, and specifically the economic of ecosystem and biodiversity. They engage with the public sector. So in 7 countries, they really influence some politic and policies, for example, in Indonesia, making agroforestry more prominent. And we, as Capitals Coalition, we really engage with the private sector and with business to change their practice. And this is a project funded by the European Union. What is our purpose? It's really to mainstream best practice, to protect biodiversity, and to work and with 1,000, I would say, people around the world to build this up. Let's check if it's go. Yeah, so where we work, we are present in 7 countries. So last year we mainly engaged in Brazil and Mexico with direct partnership with Sept, so that's the Brazilian Council for Sustainable Development, AMEBIN and GIZ. This year we are engaging with Indonesia, China and India with our partner who are IBCSD, the Center for Responsible Business, and Golden Bee. And next year we will focus on Malaysia with DHIs and with Thailand, where we have a partnership with UN agency. So what we do, we have several activities, mainly the development of an operational guidelines for business that my colleague will talk about a little bit later on. We have country by country collaboration, as I present to you. So we have the main partner, but we work with RSPO, WWF and many other locally. We develop Roundtable. So we consult the guidelines, we hear the feedback from people locally, and not only business, but also academic, the public sector, accounting, standard setter, to really consult and see are the guidelines applicable and how we can improve them. Then we have some training sessions. So in each country we have 15 hours of training content where we anchor the theory into a practical application with some exercise. And any business is welcome. And then we gather application. I think that's the most important, what business can do. So we have supporting call with all the business who want to participate, and we really help them to assess the impact and dependency on nature and people. Yeah. Is it going? Yeah. So what have been done so far? We start in 2020, setting up a steering committee with the Global Alliance for Future of Food as a chair. We built partnership, we developed a concept note, then we had the guidelines launch, we had the roundtable in Brazil and Mexico, and then we had the training in Brazil and Mexico, and we had the case development. And I want to bring a quote from Felipe Paron, with who we worked in Brazil, and he say, "TEEB is a great experience. The assessment made the whole team to realize how every small detail in our structure impact on the capital and specifically nature. We feel like we can track everything. Decisions are starting to be made, considering our waste and much more aspect than before." And this is only one of the 7 applications we just published, and I invite you to go to the Capitals Coalition website and look to those applications. This year we are doing the roundtable in India, China and Indonesia. We had the Food System Summit Dialogue, as Martin just presented. We are running currently the training session. We will have a training session on Tuesday in China, for example. We are helping the business to make the case, and we will start the roundtable in Malaysia and Thailand. So quite a busy schedule, I would say. And next year, we will have the training in Malaysia, Thailand, the case development, again, the case publication, and then the final publication of the guidelines. So if you want to participate in any of the roundtable, you're very much welcome to provide your feedback. And we hope that after we can scale up TEEBAgriFood for business, that the project just don't end in 2022, but that we can really increase our presence in other countries or in the country where we are working with more business. With that, I invite Isabel Hoffman to present the operational guidelines.
Thank you very much, Louise. Can I just confirm you can hear me? Yes, great. So, Martin has explained what the Capitals approach is. It's a very straightforward concept. It's something that is obviously useful for businesses, but it is actually something that's quite difficult or complex, or appears complex to use. So, what we need is a very easy and approachable way for businesses to actually be able to apply this approach. And this is where the TEEBAgriFood operational guidelines for business come in. So, like the Natural Capital Protocol, like the Social and Human Capital Protocol, they follow this 4-step approach, which is a replicable way for businesses to apply the capitals approach, following these 4 steps, the first of which is to frame what your assessment is, the second is to scope out what it is exactly you're going to be assessing. The measure and value stage is the most important and interesting stage, which is really where we place a value, either monetary or qualitative or quantitative, on what your impacts and dependencies are on nature. And then finally, the apply stage is when a business will take that information and really apply it to the business context. So I'm going to now guide you through each of the stages within the operational guidelines. And in order to do that, we're going to be using a hypothetical example called Blossom Foods. And this is not a real company, but it is inspired from several different companies that have done assessments. So Blossom Foods is a global conglomerate, and they make packaged goods and confectionery and canned foods. They're interested in looking at their capitals because they want to improve their strategy for responsible sourcing so that it fits in with what their targets are as a company. And the 2 of those main targets are to avoid deforestation and also to make sure that their employees and their communities have got access to clean water and hygienic water. So keep that idea in mind because we're going to be coming back to it. Let's start off with the frame stage, which is when you ask yourself, why should you conduct a capitals assessment? To start by answering that, we have to think about how it is that the capitals provide value to business. So we think of capitals in terms of stocks, which yield a flow of benefits that create value for business and for society. Now, to give you an example for natural capital, a stock of natural capital could be a forest, and a forest yields flows of benefits, which is that there's clean air, and the value of that to people is that they don't get ill because they've got clean air. So you can see the stock yields the flow, which creates the value. So, like Martin was explaining earlier, every entity, every government, business, has an impact and a dependency on the capitals. This impact and dependency leads to both costs and benefits for business and for society. By understanding these costs and benefits, a business can identify what the risks and opportunities are that are associated with their relationship to each of these capitals. So to give you an example for risks, let's say that a company uses harmful substances in their processing. That entails a cost to society, which is that the consumers become ill. That in turn yields significant risk for the business, both reputationally, because people aren't going to buy products that are making them ill, and of course financially and regulatory, they get into trouble. So by understanding what their impact and dependency, what their impact was, they could then identify what their final risk would be. The same is true for dependencies. So say that a company has got a dependency on the health of workers. By understanding that dependency, they decide that they're going to implement some health checks or health programs for their employees, which results in a significant operational opportunity, which is that their employees are not ill so that they can work harder. So by understanding and measuring what your dependency is, in the long run, the business becomes more profitable. Of course, it's not just by looking at one of the capitals that we're really going to get the information that we need for decision making. In fact, when you change one capital, you're going to be changing all of them. And that is what's really unique about the operational guidelines for business that we're talking about today, is that it's the first time that we're bringing together not only one of the capitals, but all of them at the same time, and understanding what the relationship is between them. So as an example, let's say that a company, they provide training to reduce food waste. That's great for natural capital because there's less food waste. It's great for their produced capital because they've got lower costs, they're not wasting as much food. Their human capital increases because people are more skilled and able to reduce their food waste. And of course, there's also the social capital benefit, which is that the team feels this sense of shared understanding and shared norms, collective motivation towards achieving a common good. So you might have only done it because you wanted to reduce your costs, but actually it has real replications across all of the different capitals. now that you've understood what your relationship is with the capitals, we have to work out how it is that you're actually going to use that information. So the capitals approach has got 5 quite common ways that you might use this information. It can be very useful when you're just generally trying to inform your risks and opportunities, looking at your whole business to work out where you've got risks and where you've got opportunities. Also commonly used when comparing options. So say that you're a business and you're trying to decide between 2 new suppliers, a capitals approach could really give you that pros and cons and explaining exactly where the value is created depending on which one you would choose. It can be useful in estimating net impact when you're trying to work out what your impact on your stakeholders is, and also, of course, increasingly used in reporting and in your annual report. It makes a beautiful set of information that's really useful for communication. So that's the end of the first stage. What did Blossom Foods do when they were framing their assessment? They decided that they wanted to inform their strategy because they wanted to understand what the opportunities around being able to do a capitals assessment, what would be the opportunities for them around that. They identified that maybe if they supplied from sustainable sources, that they would have a more secure supply chain. So they thought maybe that would be a good thing to look into. They also identified an financial and reputational opportunity, which was that if they were to tackle their deforestation issue, they would be able to be recognized as a deforestation-free brand. So these are 2 good reasons they wanted to explore a little bit further with their capitals assessment. But then they've got to work out what it is exactly they were going to assess. So one of the main parts of the operational guidelines for business is this idea of identifying what your most material impact drivers and dependencies are. Because of course, a business has got hundreds of impact drivers and dependencies. There are lots of different things that could be affecting their business, or a lot of things that they are affecting themselves. But what you do have to do is select the ones that are most material to what it is exactly you're wanting to look at. So to help businesses go along with this, materiality is obviously a topic that's already used commonly with business, but we have to do this in relation to the capitals. So what we do is carry out a materiality assessment. To help you to do this in the guidelines, what we've done is selected the most material impact drivers and dependencies that exist in the food system, which is based off literature reviews. And they're listed in the guidelines. I can't go through all of them right now, but I do recommend you having a look. And we've categorized them according to the different capitals. What we've then done is created an indicative materiality matrix, which takes the whole of the food system and categorizes each of these impact drivers and dependencies according to low materiality, medium materiality, and high materiality along the whole value chain. And what we're trying to communicate here is that for one business, water supply might be highly material, whereas it might not be at all for another business. Maybe at the operational side it's very important, but then when you're reaching consumers, it's not at all. So it's just a way of laying out what the impact drivers and dependencies are around you and how important they are and at what stage. Of course, when your own business is carrying them out, it's not going to look like that because not all of them are going to be relevant to you. So here's an example of what Blossom Foods did. They decided that their objective for their assessment was going to be to try and work out what their strategy was, to work out whether or not a sustainable sourcing program would in fact benefit the communities around them and also lead to long-term profitability in their business. So they thought that these 3 different impact drivers and dependencies might be relevant to their business. So they started off thinking that carbon emissions in their manufacturing probably was quite material to them. So operationally, they thought, actually, maybe that's not that material if we're thinking about what we're doing. It's not going to affect us that much. Reputationally, medium so, and financially, medium so as well. So in the end, they decided that although carbon emissions is important to their particular ambition, which was to work out their sustainable sourcing, that wasn't highly material. So they decided to leave it at that stage. The next 2, deforestation and then the dependency that they have on consumer demand for sustainable products, were in fact very material to the next stage of the guidelines, which is the measure and value stage. And this is the most interesting part of the capitals approach, because most good businesses would be measuring their impacts. That's something that's pretty accepted at the moment. If you're a good business, you evaluate your impacts. But what is interesting about the capitals approach is that we go one step further and we actually value what that impact is on people. So if I take you through this impact pathway, this is how we would carry out the measure and value stage. So say that this business, they have business activities and they produce air emissions, and that is their impact driver. Those air emissions, they cause a change in natural capital. And that change in natural capital is that there is a reduction in air quality. So both of those elements we can measure. But what's interesting is how that change in capital has a consequence on people. Because when you look at the consequence on people, then you can value it in terms of, and really work out what it is. And I've got some extra things here. We can work out what is, it's much more meaningful as a value than as a simple measurement, because you can turn it into a monetary value or a quantitative value. So the same thing is true of a dependency. Say this business here, they are very dependent on pollinators. So there is a change in natural capital, which is that the pollinators disappear. And we know that this is happening as a general pattern. It could be because of the business's own operations or another business. Regardless, there are no more bees. And that entails a cost for the business, which is that they have to import their own pollinators. So what you can do is then value. So you value what that change in capital has resulted for the business. So that's generally how we would look at evaluation. And now let me show you exactly how we would do it. It's still quite broad. I would recommend looking at the guidelines if you're interested in this. Let's take back our example of Blossom Foods. So we know that they were interested in deforestation, of working out what their deforestation is. So what did they do? Their impact driver was deforestation. How did they measure that? They looked at a survey or GIS data to work out what the hectares of deforested land was every year. So they've measured their impact driver. They then need to work out what the change in capital was. If you deforest, your soil has less potential of retaining water, so the change in capital was this change in water potential for the soil. How did they measure that? They can do direct sampling. So we have the measurement of the impact driver, we have the measurement of the change in capital, and then what we're interested in is the value. Of course, if there's going to be less retention, then there's going to be more magnitude of flooding. And that's where it's interesting, because flooding is then going to affect people, and you can translate that impact into a monetary valuation by looking at the costs of damage that are done to homes. Or there are lots of different ways that you can monetize what it is that impact is. And that would be one of the approaches would be a cost damage approach. Finally, we get to the apply stage. So they have that number of how much the flooding is affecting people and what are they going to actually do with that number. So rather than going through the theory of it, I'm going to show you what some other businesses have actually done. Olam International is a big agricultural company. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. They were interested in carrying out a capitals assessment because they were using a lot of water in their sugarcane plantation, and they were very aware of that. So they decided that they wanted to do a capitals assessment to inform their sustainability strategy. What did they actually do? They carried out an assessment on one of their sugarcane plantations in India to assess exactly what the water impacts were. How did they do that? They did a measurement and evaluation of different water indicators, and also looking at the productivity and how that was related to their water indicators. The result of the assessment, staggering. They were able to increase their productivity over 15%. They saved a huge amount of water over 3 years, and they were able to access and connect with many, many farmers to try and help them to improve the way that they were doing the farming to reduce their water impact. So by identifying what exactly it was about their water use that was problematic, they were able to really make some gains within their business and for the society around them. If you joined our session this morning, you'll be familiar with Live Up. They're our golden case study from our training session in Brazil last year. And they carried out an assessment because they wanted to understand their value chain better. They wanted to understand their risks and opportunities. They did a very general study to work out how it is that their supply chain and their model created shared value along the whole supply chain. What they ended up doing was evaluating why their supply chain was good for the small-scale farmers, and they were also interested in measuring the social and human capital gains that entailed farmers planting with them. So rather than them buying their vegetables from a source, they actually plant directly with their farmers. And they wanted to work out what it was actually the gains for the farmers for having done that. They used different indicators to work that out. First of all, they looked at what percentage of their vegetables were organic. They looked at the financial gains that the farmers would have from planting with Live Up. They also looked at the life quality improvements for the farmers, as well as looking at how often and how much they were able to buy new machinery for their farms. They're still doing their assessment. They only started this early this year, so they're still carrying out, and it's a work in progress. But what they're hoping to do is that they'll be able to communicate the impact that they're having much more clearly, because they've got these results laid out so clearly. They would like to do another assessment looking at their organic versus their non-organic supplies, and they would also like to prove or show more clearly what the benefits are for farmers of planting with Live Up as opposed to not planting with Live Up, or of shopping with them rather than shopping at a normal supermarket. So with that, that is the operational guidelines in a nutshell. We'd be really happy to send them to you if you'd like to have a look. And there's still opportunities to get involved with the training sessions that we're still running. And we've got, as Louise mentioned earlier, some fantastic pilot applications that might be of interest to you. But without further ado, I'll hand back to Louise, who's going to introduce the next part of this session, which is when we're going to hear from you, I hope.
Thank you. That was an amazing presentation. Really, and again, I invite you to look at the 7 pilot application. We have some case on free carbon cheese, more sustainable meat production, and we say that it's quite hard in that value chain. We also have vanilla sustainable production, how we can grow more avocado that are also sustainable and look to biodiversity. Some bank who apply also the methodology, so really encourage you to look at that. Now we want to hear a bit more from you, be interactive, listen what you think and how we can improve the project, how we can improve our impact. So I invite you to go to Mentimeter. Some of you might be also already familiar with it. So Mentimeter, you can go to www.menti, like it's right here, it's written here, .com. So again, www.menti.com. And we will ask you 2 questions, and there is the code here. It's a little bit small, so I will read it for you. It's 580682. So again, 580682. I hope that everybody have it. I saw a lot of you have your phone. So our question to feed the panel discussion that is just coming is, what main driver will contribute toward transformative change that we all want in the food system? You might have many ideas. We have ours too, but we will be interested to know your perspective. So it's only a few words. Maybe you will think about regulation, taxes appearing, financial requirement, awareness, many possibilities, but we want to hear from you what are the main driver, what can push the food system transformation forward. So policy making, indeed we see a lot of recommendation, but still not, we need more a prescriptive approach on measuring and valuing impact and dependency. Consumer demand, indeed we see growing interest on organic or responsible farming. Regulation, again, consumer health, definitely. When we think about health, it's our health, the health of ecosystem. It's all related, as COVID showed, for example. Demand governance, indeed. Client awareness. Definitely, we need much more awareness, not only in client, but we see also in business, working with business employee. Not only the sustainability team, but we had great engagement with finance team who want to account, with marketing who want to better communicate. Natural capital accounting, educating corporation, transdisciplinary, that's the idea of capital approach, rescaling and relocating, quite interesting one, having a local perspective, ecosystem service maybe degradation, governance, again, client awareness, civil society pressure, interesting, indicating cooperation, well, that's what we do. And we really hope that you can contribute to that project too. I will go to the next one. If you can change the slide. Oops. Yeah. So thank you very much for the first question. Now we would like to ask you, what suggestion would you have for the successful scale-up and dissemination of the capital approach for food system transformation? Again, we talk about capital approach, but for us it's really the that understanding that if we measure and value and take into account those impact and dependency into decision making, we can transform the way business and society act. So what would be your suggestion to scale up and not staying only on the front runner place, but making all the business engage toward that transition? Adaptation to small business, that's a very key approach, and we know that they have less capacity to run assessment, so we also very much agree that it's important to have SMEs on board. Engaging example, really again go to the 7 pilot application case study dissemination. For case study, I invite you to go to the Capitals Coalition website. We have more than 150 case studies example around the world from business and government on capital approach, language, definitely how we communicate, how we engage with people. Practical application of accounting for ecosystem services. This is definitely what we are talking about. Measuring its impact using other impact assessment method against the SDG. Very interesting how we can feed into SDG reporting and communication. Translate to different language. For that, the guidelines are translated into Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, and in Bahasa for Indonesia, and it will be soon in Thai too. So, and if you want to help us translate in any other language, that's with pleasure. Outcome measurement, helping business manage trade-off between capitals and specific aim. Leadership training corporate, definitely we want to scale up that too, and we hope we can do it. Please talk with us after the session to see how we can collaborate further. Help business manage trade-off between the capital. Definitely, sometimes they improve the natural capital, but there is social and human capital who is impacted negatively or the other way around. So it's really important to have that systemic approach. I think we can stop there. Thank you very much for feeding into the discussion. And with that in mind, I would like to invite our excellent panel. So Willem Ferreira, that we already know now. Florence Jantet from OP2B, so One Planet Business for Biodiversity, and Rodrigo Casola from UNEP WCMC. So please, you can come, have a seat, maybe here, and I will sit here. Do you have a microphone? Yeah, please. Yeah, definitely. So, thank you very much for being here, all. I think it's a great pleasure for us to have such a qualitative panel, I would say. We invite you today because we think that it's important to go to practical application and have a multi-stakeholder point of view. And I will come to you first, Willem, please. So, my question is, so you present us a regenerative business. What is a regenerative approach? And our question is why Commonland adopt that view of regenerative business and how to incentivize business to deliver value across all the capitals, those that you mentioned.
Oh, thank you. That's more than one question. Now, I think the most important thing about, let's say talk about regenerative agriculture and agroforestry systems is that that differs from, let's say, organic agriculture, but it includes quite often organic agriculture, of course. But the most important thing is that farmers, as well as producers and consumers, are going to think about how can an agricultural system produce more than only food or fibers, and build, in fact, soil and build biodiversity into the system, because we all know, and science has proven that that in that way you create a resilient production system within a resilient landscape, and that will help to avoid the impact of heavy weather events and disasters. So for business as well as for investors, it will bring down risks. The difficulty is, of course, the guidelines. There are a lot of guidelines, and we have developed with others a set of guidelines, and basically they're not very different from the current organic agriculture. But the most important thing is you need to work with more crops in polycropping systems, and you need to understand the ecology of the area You need to understand, for instance, that coffee and cacao are rainforest species that are in the herb area, let's say 2-3 meters high, in a rainforest system based. That means they're shade species. And if you're trying to make all the kind of settings out of that, it will not work. So you can create a multi-cropping system. And at least if you this will probably be possible for many agricultural settings, including cereals. We work with cereals in Australia. We produce regenerative oat, for instance. The most important thing is consistency. It will take some years before this really takes off. And so you need, for investors, it means you need to cover what we call the value of debt to make sure that you can continue on this. But we see this as a next step within a landscape setting. The next step is without natural systems and connecting nature-protected areas, it will not work. Because we don't want to turn the whole world into a regenerative ag. We want to have forest, primary ecosystems. So the combination within a landscape setting, large scale, is where we need to go. And to work with corporates and investors and local governments and farmers on this and conservationists, that's the challenge. That will make sure that we are entering the age of ecology, because we are entering the age of ecology, not the age of travel to Mars or the age of artificial intelligence or you name it, or Teslas. This is the new way of working, and the lovely thing is, many corporates are understanding this, but it's tough for them to work in a landscape setting, and that's where we could come in with this framework.
Thank you very much. I think the key element was, okay, there is that route. We can see that we can go from monocropping to polyculture, for example. The business, they can look to their impact and dependency, but they really need to have that landscape approach and multi-stakeholder approach.
Yeah.
But how we can accelerate that, because we know that there is front runner, but there is all the others.
Yeah, the acceleration is the narrative. So if we have 1,000 landscapes with 1,000 narratives and thousands approaches, it will not work. But if we are able to create a kind of an intel insight, and that's what we try to bring here to the table, and kind of intel insight, you can compare landscapes, and the KPIs, and people can exchange information while they work in completely different ecosystems. So grasslands or forest lands or wetlands with their agricultural systems in it are different, of course. But it is about creating that intel insight for what we call the regenerative industry, to create a regenerative economy, because that's the ultimate game.
Okay.
Paul, sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that narrative is so important to engage, and we see that there is a shift in the conservation area on how we change from pointing to the responsible of impact to understand that they are, in fact, business also part of the solution, and we need to go together with that integrative and systemic approach. So thank you very much, Willem. I will go next to you. Please, Florence. So we are delighted to have someone that represents the business sector. I think that's so key and so important to have you on board. Also, you can say maybe some few words about OP2B, so people know a bit better about who you are and what you do. And our question for you would be, from the Mentimeter activities, you saw also all those words, and for sure it feeds your reflection. And we would like to know, what are for you the main driver that business need, because they need to be pushed somewhere to be actor of the food system transformation?
Thank you very much, Louise. I hope you hear me. Thank you very much for the invitation here, indeed representing the food business. Few words about OP2B. One Planet Business for Biodiversity is a coalition of 25 large companies across the value chain. So we go from farmer representation down to retailers like Walmart, and we are gathering different sectors: the food industry, the cosmetic industry, the luxury goods, and the suppliers in between. We are single focus on agriculture. Why? Because those companies are actually have realized, and before COVID, that their supply chain was completely dependent, or very largely dependent, on agriculture. So they took the challenge, the CEO took the challenge to work out from a pre-competitive perspective on how are we going collectively to transform the supply chain to get back agro-biodiversity there. And we focus on regenerative agriculture, biodiversity into the portfolio, and also restoring the high-value ecosystem, because that's a part of also regenerative agriculture understanding. Back to your question on what do we need for the business to accelerate. The first thing we need, I think, we cannot rely on a few leading-edge CEOs' thoughts and thinking and reflection to drive the change. That's amazing. That's what those guys are doing here. But we need to get everyone along. To get everyone, we need a collective ambition. We start with a collective ambition, and I think this opportunity of the post-2020 framework is essential, and we have all to contribute there, whatever the sector of activities we are in the day-to-day. We need then clear targets. Business is about target, is about measurement. So when we have the target, we need measurement. To get measurement, we need a framework. And I think the work that you are carrying is amazing in this place. When we look at what we do as leading edge in terms of regenerative agriculture, we have had to define what is our common target across these 25 companies, because the leading edge companies are already moving, and the risk is that we are creating even more chaos than what it is. So it's great to hear the work bottom up that you are doing collectively on the ground, and much more from a corporate perspective as well. But there is a need that we are trying very humbling, from a very humble perspective, to cover, which is the alignment between those companies that are starting to move. And that's where we have, I invite all of you to join us Monday. We are launching the framework, which is nothing else than this alignment. This framework comes from a lot of discussion. It's a year of work between all those companies, civil society and scientists to get to this point, and get in objectives that we are going to embark ourselves on a consistent and coherent manner, because we need also consistent and coherent manner. The third thing we need, ambition target framework, is actually a context, a setting which will, force is a big word, but will encourage all the companies about disclosure. And when talking about companies, is food companies, is corporate companies overall, but also the financial institutions and the investors. So let's go and support for disclosure. I think that would be essential. And for the rest, if we have all these set, I think we can start running the show. So let's join all the parties and let's drive a collective ambition wherever we come from, because I'm truly convinced that that's the only way where we can, by transforming the agriculture, we can find solutions for people, from farms down to consumers, for nature, because agriculture is a contributor to the climate solution as much as today of a problem, and environment, because it's about the biodiversity, and it's about also, don't forget about the agro-biodiversity, the biodiversity of what we eat every day, and source of future nutrition is there. So I think that's what we need.
Yeah, thank you very much. So informative. And I just realized that we run really quickly our presentation. So in fact, we have more time for the panel discussion. So that's excellent. Good news. You don't have to keep it short. You can be a bit more explaining really your message. But coming back to your point, I think this is really related with what you also mentioned. There is 1,000 of framework, and it's important really now to start framing a consistent approach, and with the business, but with international institution, with coalition, as Capital's Coalition, or with UNEP, WCMC, because how business will need what they have to do if there is many different information coming to them, and which one they should choose. I think the systemic change we need is also being more coherent between all the institutions on what is needed in terms of target. And as we have a little bit more time, so tomorrow you will have the publication of your framework. You mentioned 8 KPI. I think so. That's really exciting. Maybe you can't say exactly what are those KPI, but if you can say a little bit more word about that, so we make sure that we integrate that into the guidelines too, because the guidelines will be published in final version in 2022. So we are very much interested in.
Thank you about that. I will not completely disclose what we're going to say tomorrow. But first of all, it's not going to be rocket science. Secondly, is based on what is existing that we have, again, collectively put together. And with the intention to contribute to a much wider change. And we have been working with a number of organizations and team members to do that. It's about getting basically what is regenerative agriculture objectives. And we will tell you that is basically 4 objectives. Which are pretty simple, back to what I just said. It needs to address, first of all, farmers' livelihood. Secondly, enable more biodiversity and less, or finding nature-based solution to decrease the use of pesticide and fertilizer. It would be about soil health and how soil health will enable to build more carbon in the soil and retain water. And I miss one, so you will have to listen to me tomorrow.
For sure.
And we have turned, from a business perspective, when we have these objectives, is also how do you measure that? How do you make sure that you start walking the talk, knowing that it's going to take a lot of time to translate? So we have pulled out of all the framework existing that we found, and we found many from the companies, from different academical systems, civil society organization. We pull out more than 150 indicators. And for the business, 150 indicators is just like, forget it. So we just said, okay, what is available, affordable, that we can start using on the ground? And that are representing our proxy as much as we can to the 4 objectives of what is our regenerative definition. And that's the reason and the way we were down to 8. Which you will hear tomorrow about, but there are things that everyone knows, which is common sense. So again, the point is not to create something new per se. The point is to say, if you go after these 4 objectives and you start to measure based on the science which is existing today, these 8 parameters, key indicators, we are going to go collectively on the right direction, and we are going to make sure that when company A is saying, I go for regenerative agriculture, the company B is going in the same direction to avoid to create challenges in between partners and at the end, at the farm, because we cannot get at the farm being one of those companies wants it pink and the same company is going indirectly to this farm saying, I want blue. Because the results of that would be that farmers will say, thank you very much, get back to your office, and then we will talk. Because from a business perspective, farms are business. Farmers are business owners. They need a business case. To have a business case, they need clarity, certainty, and volume.
Thank you. That was really informative, and I would like to come back to your point about disclosure, because I think what you mentioned is also how we create an enabling environment that create a kind of safe level playing field for all the actors, because if some are taking action but other not, there can be different kind of competition there. And I would like to mention the nature-related financial disclosure. We also work with them. I think they produce a report on water disclosure. They will publish one on biodiversity, and really invite you to also have a look, and hope we can work more together with OP2B and make sure we align also and have that consistency between us.
More than welcome. Again, we need the effort of everyone. What the business needs, what companies need, is clarity on driving towards an objectives with simple, affordable, available means.
Yeah, so with that, I think that's the perfect transition to go to Rodrigo, because if we need a clear, a simple way to measure, we need also to make sure that there is easy to use tool and metrics, and that those are coherent between them and how we communicate that to business. And you from UNEP's WCMC perspective, you've been working really hard on that, so it would be really nice to hear your point of view. Thanks.
It's a really interesting perspective because I don't think easy is the word there, because if it's easy but it's not recognized or it's not accepted widely, it might not be fit for purpose. So it's, I guess, what I would use actually, it needs to be something that's fit for purpose, that it's actually measuring something that will make sense for the company, will be recognized by others. And that's what we've been trying to do as UNEP WCMC, is actually convene all people that are developing those tools, methods, metrics, and try at least to give it some sense of direction. So to find a common ground, basically, in terms of what the direction we are going. This will be much better, I would say, in a couple of years with the evolution of the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, which is hopefully will create a framework that's similar to what TCFD meant for climate. We will have something similar for the environment as well. So I would say instead of easy, I would say fit for purpose and applicable. And if it's difficult in the end, if we get the direction, it's difficult. We have to work on innovation then and create tools that facilitate or make it as easy as possible. One example would be the IBAT Alliance, which is one of the tools we have out there to provide easy access to data and to metrics for companies. It's, yeah, I would say my response would be, it will get better in a couple of years in terms of what people agree needs to be measured. Right now we have we are working with 20 plus developers of metrics and tools. They are available, they are out there, and companies should be using them. I guess there's no excuse for not using. And yeah, it's interesting the example you gave from your work on indicators, because we went through some similar process in the case of finance, because we work closely with the land use finance program from UNEP, which they're basically trying to work with the financial sector to make the case that financing sustainable agriculture is something that's viable and it makes sense from a money perspective and also from an environmental perspective. And in this context, we developed a directory of indicators, and we started collecting all indicators that were out there, and there were 120 plus indicators as well. And we tried to summarize that and bring it down to a common ground and end up with a list of 16 indicators that at least we can work on. So let's agree that those are the most relevant ones, and from here we can depart, or from here we can develop the necessary tools to measure. And yeah, I guess it's finding common ground. That's where we are right now.
Thank you. I think that was interesting that you start saying, well, it's not about easy tool. In fact, it's a tool and metric that have purpose, that are meaningful. But indeed, I think there is really also that point about making those clear and affordable for business to make sure that they have the capacity to measure those. So I would be really interested to have a kind of comparison between your target and the metric and in the guidelines what we mentioned and what UNEP do. So we are sure that even between among us we create that framework, and with also the for return framework. I would like to go to the next question. So that will be the same question for the three of you. We would like to know what would be your suggestion to successfully scale up the guidelines adoption. So it's the guidelines about measurement and valuation and embedding nature and people consideration into decision making. Indeed, this is compatible with many other approaches as yours, but how we can really skyrocket the adoption of embedding nature and people into accounting and other processes that can drive a change in the decision and in the application, making sure that we reverse biodiversity loss. Maybe you can start, Willem. Thank you.
Wow, you're not. You're asking a lot of another difficult question, of course. But we are all people, and we have. I think we all realize that the people working on the ground and are embedded on the ground, farmers, conservation people, local entrepreneurs, they love the place where they are. So that's a taken. The more you go away from that, corporates, investors, institutes, in the big cities, they lose that connection. And if you lose that connection, then it's easier to have 120 KPIs or even more and throw them over the farmers or conservation actors and so on, while they have no idea why that is needed. So I think building that link between the institutions and what's happening on the ground is you need to build trust. And trust you can measure, because trust is about inspiration and drive. If people are going to do things because they understand it, they will do it. If there is a trustful relationship. So you need to invest in trustful relationship with a very long-term commitment. So we build landscape partnership for at least 20 years. That costs money. That means we need to have process funding to make that happen. Process funding is for corporate very difficult. For governments it's difficult. So who's paying this? Because we are talking about the commons. And I think we need to ask ourselves that question. Are we willing to put process funding for at least a few decades into regions to make sure that the KPIs we all develop are going to happen on the ground? If not, we're just not doing the right things. Because we are too much creating a too large distance. And I think that is what I've learned, working in this world now for 3 decades. Stick to the ground, use the right KPIs, but start with inspiration. And make sure you build trust and you stay there. Maybe that's an answer you didn't expect. But
Thank you.
Because your question is very difficult.
Yeah, well, that's the idea, to challenge. It can go to Florence. And I think your point about connecting urban and rural area is really important. So to make those connections, those network, and this is about social capital, building that trust. And I think that's what we need more and more in the future, to really make sure that everybody address those common good that we all impact on and we all want to take care. Florence, can I go to you with the same question?
Yeah,
please?
and funny enough, I'm going to go in the same direction than Willem. The first, I think, it's to reconnect consumers and agriculture. We tend to forget, because we live in the cities, that the food we eat every day come from some kilometers away or further down in big cities, and we lost what does it mean. How does it look before it ended up in our plate? And if we reconnect the consumer and the agriculture, we can start to explain what need to change. So get a purpose of, to come back on indeed fitting for purpose as well, get a purpose on every time I buy a certain food, I drive a certain transformation. So for me, consumer. The second thing is, I think Willem, you say it as well, acceleration will depend on our ability to finance. So there won't be any magic money. We cannot go and turn to the farmers to say, you're going to pay for this transformation, because they are already in quite some difficulties. Consumer won't pay and cannot afford. Companies with the current financial system are also in a very difficult position to do that. So back again, how do we redistribute the money? We think differently the system, and back to your framework on the accountability somewhere and the accountants about the dependence that we are creating. And the target, because again, if we get a collective ambition with a target, collective ambition and a target, every part of the society can act together. Because I really kind of a little bit concerned about more discussion and more trying to get alignment versus rolling our sleeves collectively and just get on the ground and get it started. We have 8 crops left. It's not even 9 anymore, because the crop of next year is happening on the field right now in many parts of the world. So yes, we need to continue to align, but we need to start acting collectively and find small solutions, create these magic crystals that you, Willem, have been driving for many years also on the ground, demonstrating that yes, it can be done, and scale it up fast. So let's go for it.
So act now, have the sense of urgency, And I really like your point about connecting the consumer to the product. I think that's a very value chain approach also, and with all the related story about traceability. And on finance, I think that's really related to disclosure also, because some finance investor, they want to make sure that they are supporting biodiversity. So they are not supporting the biodiversity degradation, but they are really aiming for a natural positive world. Rodrigo, can we have your final view on that before closing the panel? Thank you.
Yeah, perhaps a bit of a different perspective. I would say one key aspect is you're already doing is create strong use cases that you can, and those should be along the value chain of the commodities. So it will be different for a company that is downstream, so a manufacturer, than if you compare to a farmer. So it's good to have those two views there and see how the guidelines would be applicable in these cases. And I'd say that we know what is the main problem of agriculture now in terms of natural capital loss, and it's deforestation. I guess that would be my next suggestion. So linking the guidelines with the no deforestation regime and no conversion of other ecosystems, that you can establish real, or it could be in the sense of use cases or even specific guidance that you focus on the key commodities that are driving deforestation. That's another key discussion in agriculture that you can bring into the guidelines and incorporate that as a reason for the guidelines to be used as well.
Thank you. So your point really about how we can also address deforestation and how we can really shift that perspective. So thank you very much to all. It was a fascinating panel, and for sure there is people here listening, but also online people, and we will make the recording available. So it will continue to bring the message forward to act for food system transformation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Louise, and a wonderful panel, and you really are all a panel of actors. Not that you're on stage, but you're acting. You're all so very much focused on the real action on the ground, even with WCMC when it's on measurement, because it's measurement getting it done also. That is really great to hear. So I think we had a wonderful deep dive into TEEBagriculture. Thank you here, and thank you also to the listeners online. Great that you could be here on a Sunday. Probably you wanted to do, maybe you wanted to do other things, but good that you're here. This is the last slide, just to remember you that we are a coalition. A coalition only works if we have people that are active, that are joining the coalition to work with us. You can do that as an organization, which is important. So organizations like Commonland or WCMC are partners, but you also can do it as an individual. And maybe I shouldn't say it, but it's even more important to do it as an individual, because we need people. People will create the coalition that we need. So thank you very much for joining us today. Come back for other interesting sessions later today or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. We close the session.